A routine performance turned into sheer terror, as a massive orca dragged its trainer to the depths, shaking her like a rag doll while horrified screams echoed through the stadium. Blood filled the tank, rescue attempts failed, and the unthinkable unfolded. But this is just one of 6 deadly predator encounters that will leave you gripping your seat. Watch to discover the chilling details of each attack. It was a warm day on March 3, 2018, at Ocean Majesty Park in Tenerife, Canary Islands, Spain. The sun hung high above, casting bright light over the shimmering water in the tanks. The park, known for its elaborate marine life shows, was bustling with families and tourists eager to witness the incredible bond between trainers and orcas. Orcas, often called killer whales, are apex predators and can weigh up to 12,000 pounds. Despite their strength, they were the stars of the show, drawing massive crowds to marvel at their intelligence and grace. The trainers at the park worked tirelessly to connect with these massive creatures. One of them was Isabella Greene, a 32-year-old trainer with years of experience working with orcas. She wasn't famous outside the park, but within its gates, she was a standout. Isabella had spent years building trust with Titan, a 10,000-pound male orca. Titan had been at the park since he was young, brought in from another facility. He was powerful, his black and white body cutting through the water with ease, and he was known for his unpredictable temperament. That morning, Isabella arrived early. She walked briskly past the gates, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The staff greeted her with waves and nods. She had her routine down to perfection. Before the shows began, Isabella spent hours prepping, reviewing the performances with her team and checking on the animals. Titan's tank was one of her first stops. The orca floated near the surface, his dorsal fin slicing through the water. Isabella crouched by the tank's edge, dropping pieces of fish into the water and watching as Titan responded with calculated movements. She noticed something was off. Titan seemed more agitated than usual. His responses were slower, and he slapped the water harder than normal. But the show had to go on, and Isabella hoped Titan would settle down by performance time. By noon, the stadium was packed. Rows of excited spectators filled the seats around the main tank. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, building anticipation for the synchronized swimming act. Isabella stood at the edge of the platform, clad in her wetsuit. Her hair was tied back, and her face carried the focused determination she was known for. When her cue came, Isabella dove gracefully into the water, her body cutting through the surface with ease. Titan followed, his sleek frame gliding alongside her. For a few minutes, the routine went as planned. Isabella and Titan moved in harmony, their synchronized spins and dives drawing cheers from the crowd. Trainers at Ocean Majesty had always emphasized the importance of building trust with the orcas, and it was clear Isabella had done just that, at least until that moment. Midway through the performance, something shifted. As Isabella prepared for the next segment, Titan hesitated. He hovered in place, his eyes fixed on her. The crowd wouldn't have noticed, but the trainers watching from the side of the tank did. Isabella gave her hand signal, a command for Titan to perform a high-speed jump. Instead, Titan lunged. His massive jaws clamped down on Isabella's leg with crushing force. The crowd gasped, unsure if this was part of the show. Trainers on the platform shouted, their voices drowned out by the commotion. Isabella's body twisted in the water as Titan pulled her under, dragging her to the tank's depths. The silence from the audience turned to screams as blood began to cloud the water. Rescue efforts began immediately. Trainers on the platform banged the water with poles, a tactic meant to distract Titan. Others scrambled to deploy nets. Inside the control room, staff hit emergency buttons to drain the tank. But Titan wasn't letting go. He shook Isabella like a rag doll, the force of his movement slamming her against the tank's walls. Minutes stretched like hours. Underwater, Isabella fought desperately, her hands clawing at Titan's jaws. She tried to push herself free, but her strength was no match for the orca's power. Her lungs burned as she ran out of air, her body battered by the repeated impacts. On the surface, trainers yelled into radios, pleading for more help. The draining water lowered the tank level, exposing Titan's massive frame. But the orca seemed more agitated than ever. The crowd was evacuated, and security guided people out of the stadium. Children cried as parents shielded their eyes, and some stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Behind the scenes, paramedics waited, ready to intervene the moment Isabella could be reached. Divers prepared to enter the tank, though they knew the risk was immense. Approaching Titan in his current state could mean their deaths too. When the water finally drained to a manageable level, a trainer used a long pole to press a release point near Titan's mouth. The orca opened his jaws briefly, and Isabella's limp body floated to the surface. Two divers jumped in, pulling her out as quickly as they could. Titan thrashed behind them, his tail sending waves crashing against the walls. Isabella was laid on the platform, her wetsuit torn and stained with blood. Paramedics surrounded her, performing CPR and checking for a pulse. Her leg was mangled, the flesh torn to the bone, and her torso bore deep bruises from Titan's grip. Despite their efforts, there was nothing they could do. Isabella's injuries were too severe. The official time of death was marked minutes later. Titan was ushered into a holding area, his behavior still erratic. Trainers stood in silence, some crying, others staring at the water where Isabella had spent her final moments. The show had ended in tragedy, leaving a scar on everyone who witnessed it. The park closed temporarily after the incident. The tragedy raised questions about keeping such powerful animals in captivity and the risks trainers face every day. But for those who knew Isabella, it was a painful reminder of the bond she had dedicated her life to, a bond that, in the end, turned deadly. It was March 8, 2020, a quiet morning off the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia. The coastline stretched far and wide, the waves crashing gently along the rocks. This region, known for its breathtaking marine life, was also infamous for the great white sharks that lurked beneath its waters. People flocked here for adventure, diving, fishing, kayaking. But locals knew the risks. Sharks, especially great whites, dominated these waters, sometimes reaching lengths of up to 20 feet. Powerful predators, they were known for their stealth and speed, their attacks sudden and brutal. Rachel Carter, a 24-year-old college student, was drawn to this place for its beauty and challenge. She wasn't a tourist, but a South Australian native who grew up near the ocean. Studying marine biology, Rachel loved the sea, spending every chance she got exploring its mysteries. That day, she decided to embark on a solo kayaking trip, something she had done many times before. She was experienced and confident, her bright blue kayak loaded with water, snacks, and her camera to capture the wildlife she loved. Rachel left early, just as the sun was rising. She had parked her car near a secluded beach, strapped on her life jacket, and pushed the kayak into the water. The plan was to paddle out to a small cove about 5 miles away, known for its crystal-clear waters and occasional sightings of dolphins and seals. She smiled as she paddled out, the rhythm of her strokes steady and smooth. It was peaceful, with no one else in sight, just her and the open sea. By late morning, Rachel had covered several miles, her kayak cutting through the water with ease. She paused occasionally, taking pictures of seabirds and watching seals play in the distance. But as she neared the halfway point of her trip, the atmosphere shifted. The water grew darker in patches, colder. Rachel didn't notice at first, her focus on the horizon. But below her, deep in the murky depths, something moved. It was a 15-foot great white shark circling silently, its eyes fixed on the kayak above. Great whites are apex predators, and in South Australian waters, they are both feared and respected. They often hunt seals and other marine animals, their attacks swift and violent. This one had likely mistaken Rachel's kayak for a seal. Its movements were calculated, each circle bringing it closer to the surface. Rachel kept paddling, unaware of the danger below. She adjusted her grip, her paddle slicing through the water as she moved further from the coastline. Suddenly, there was a powerful jolt. The kayak tipped violently to one side, throwing Rachel off balance. She gasped as the kayak rocked beneath her. Before she could react, the shark surged from the water, its massive jaws clamping down on the back of the kayak. The force was immense. Rachel was thrown into the air, landing in the cold water with a splash. Her paddle sank instantly, and the kayak flipped over, leaving her exposed. Panic set in as she gasped for air, her life jacket keeping her afloat. She turned toward the kayak, hoping to cling to its side, but the shark struck again. Its body slammed into the kayak, sending it spinning. Rachel's heart pounded as she screamed, the sound echoing across the empty sea. She kicked her legs frantically, trying to distance herself from the shark, but it was too late. The great white lunged, its jaws closing around her torso. The pressure was unbearable, like being caught in a vice. The shark thrashed violently, dragging her under the water. Underneath, Rachel struggled. Her arms flailed, trying to push the shark away, but its grip was unrelenting. Blood clouded the water as the shark shook her body back and forth. She fought with everything she had, her instincts driving her to survive. The pain was excruciating. Her vision blurred as the world turned red. Above the surface, the scene was chaos. From a distance, a small fishing boat had spotted the commotion. The crew saw the overturned kayak and the splashes of water tinged with blood. They sped toward the site, shouting and waving to get Rachel's attention. But as they drew closer, the sight became clearer. The shark's dorsal fin cut through the water, circling what remained of Rachel's kayak. Rachel broke the surface briefly, her screams carrying over the waves. She reached for the kayak, her fingers brushing its edge before the shark pulled her under again. The fishing boat crew could only watch, helpless, as the predator continued its attack. They threw ropes into the water, hoping Rachel could grab one. But there was no sign of her. The shark delivered a final blow, its jaws crushing the kayak with ease. Pieces of plastic floated to the surface, along with Rachel's camera and life jacket. The water was still now, save for the faint ripples left by the shark's tail as it disappeared into the depths. When the boat reached the scene, all they found was debris. Blood streaked the water, and bits of the kayak bobbed with the waves. They searched desperately, scanning the surface and peering into the water. But Rachel was gone. The realization hit them hard. There was nothing left to save. Over the next few days, search crews combed the area, hoping to find Rachel's body. Helicopters flew overhead and divers scoured the sea, but the only thing recovered was her mangled kayak, washed ashore miles from the attack site. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the community, a stark reminder of the ocean's unpredictable nature. Rachel's story became a haunting tale for those who ventured into the waters of South Australia. The great white shark, a creature she had admired and studied, had claimed her life in a brutal, unforgiving attack. Her love for the ocean had brought her to its depths, and in those depths she faced its raw, terrifying power. The morning started like any other on the water. A small boat rocked gently as it carried its passengers toward a secluded dive site on the Great Barrier Reef. The group on board was excited, buzzing with nervous energy. They were about to explore one of the most famous underwater ecosystems in the world. The reef was alive with marine life, home to over 1,500 species of fish, vibrant coral structures, and predators that commanded both respect and fear. Leading the group that day was Marcus Layton, a 40-year-old professional diver with years of experience under his belt. Known for his calm demeanor and extensive knowledge, Marcus was a trusted guide. His passion for the ocean was obvious, and he took pride in giving his clients unforgettable experiences. July 22, 2015, was no different. The group of 5 divers was eager to see the beauty below the surface, and Marcus planned to take them to a remote part of the reef that was off the usual tourist paths. The dive site, about an hour from the mainland, was pristine and quiet. The Great Barrier Reef was breathtaking in its vastness, but its beauty masked the dangers lurking in its depths. Tiger sharks, known as one of the most aggressive shark species, often patrolled these waters. They could grow up to 16 feet long and had a reputation for their bold, unpredictable behavior. Marcus had encountered tiger sharks before, and while he respected their power, he knew the importance of keeping calm and following safety protocols. By mid-morning, the group reached their destination. The water shimmered in the sunlight, clear enough to see schools of fish swimming just below the surface. Marcus gave a quick briefing, reminding everyone to stay together and follow his lead. He double-checked the equipment, ensuring everyone's air tanks and masks were secure. Then, one by one, the divers slipped into the water, disappearing beneath the waves. The underwater world was mesmerizing. The group swam past coral gardens, their vibrant colors glowing in the filtered sunlight. Small fish darted in and out of crevices, while larger species cruised lazily above. Marcus led the group with confidence, pointing out interesting sights and making sure everyone stayed close. For the first 20 minutes, the dive was peaceful, almost dreamlike. Then, things changed. As they approached a deeper section of the reef, Marcus noticed a shadow moving in the distance. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of motion on the edge of his vision. He paused, scanning the area. The shadow grew larger, moving with deliberate, fluid motions. It wasn't a fish or a turtle. It was a tiger shark over 14 feet long, and it was heading toward them. Marcus signaled to the group, urging them to stay calm and slowly retreat. The divers obeyed, their movements careful as they began to ascend toward the surface. The shark moved closer, its sleek body cutting through the water with ease. Marcus stayed at the back of the group, positioning himself between the shark and the others. His heart raced, but his focus remained sharp. He had been in situations like this before, and knew that sudden movements could provoke an attack. The shark circled once, its eyes fixed on the group. Then, without warning, it surged forward. The speed was startling. Marcus barely had time to react before the shark clamped its powerful jaws around his thigh. The force was unimaginable, like being caught in a steel trap. Blood clouded the water instantly, spreading in a red haze around them. Marcus tried to free himself, his hands striking at the shark's snout. The group above watched in horror, frozen as the scene unfolded below. The shark thrashed violently, dragging Marcus deeper. The pain was overwhelming, but he fought to stay conscious, his instincts pushing him to survive. The group scrambled to the surface, breaking through the water and shouting for the boat crew. The sound of their panic carried across the waves as the crew sprang into action. They threw ropes and flotation devices into the water, desperate to help. But below the surface, Marcus's struggle continued. The shark released him briefly, its massive body circling for another attack. Marcus tried to swim toward the surface, his leg useless and bleeding heavily. Before he could make it far, the shark struck again, this time biting into his abdomen. The pain was unbearable, radiating through his body as the shark's teeth tore into him. Marcus's movements slowed, his strength fading with every second. The crew managed to pull the rest of the group onto the boat, their faces pale with shock. They pointed to the blood-streaked water where Marcus had been, pleading for someone to do something, but no one could get close. The shark's massive dorsal fin sliced through the surface, a chilling reminder of its presence. When the shark finally disappeared, the crew ventured cautiously toward the scene. They pulled Marcus's lifeless body from the water, his wetsuit torn and soaked in blood. His injuries were severe, the damage too great for anyone to save him. The group sat in stunned silence, their excitement from earlier replaced by grief and disbelief. The dive that day was supposed to be an adventure, a chance to see the beauty of the Great Barrier Reef up close. But it became a nightmare, a reminder of the ocean's raw power and the risks that come with exploring its depths. For Marcus, a man who had dedicated his life to the sea, it was a tragic end in the waters he loved so much. The early hours of the day are when Oahu's North Shore feels most alive, even though it's quiet. Waves crash in rhythmic beats and the air carries the salt of the ocean. Surfers favor this time not just for the calm but for the undisturbed waters. Dylan Reyes, a 27-year-old professional surfer, loved these mornings. On December 12, 2016, he arrived at Bonsai Pipeline before sunrise, his board tucked under his arm. Dylan was training for an upcoming competition and knew this session was important. The waves that morning promised perfect practice for the daring moves he was known for. Dylan was a fixture on the North Shore surfing scene. Born and raised in Honolulu, he'd spent most of his life in the water. His passion for surfing started when he was just a kid, watching local legends carve through waves. By his teens, he was competing, winning small tournaments, and building a name for himself. By 27, he was no longer an up-and-comer. He was a seasoned pro, admired for his skill and fearlessness. But what set him apart wasn't just his talent. It was his deep respect for the ocean and its unpredictable nature. That morning, Dylan followed his usual routine. He parked his truck in a quiet lot, grabbed his board, and jogged barefoot to the shore. The beach was mostly empty, with only a handful of other surfers scattered across the sand. The waves rolled in steadily, peaking at over 6 feet. Dylan waded into the water, his movements easy and confident. He paddled out, letting the rhythm of the ocean guide him. The North Shore is a beautiful but dangerous place. Beneath its inviting waves, powerful currents and sharp coral can turn a simple wipeout into a life-threatening situation. It's also home to some of the world's largest tiger sharks. These sharks, known for their size and aggression, patrol Hawaii's waters year-round. They can grow up to 16 feet and weigh over 1,300 pounds. Tiger sharks are apex predators, eating everything from fish to sea turtles. Attacks on humans are rare, but when they happen, they are devastating. Dylan knew the risks. Surfers in Hawaii talk about sharks the way climbers talk about avalanches, a constant, silent threat, but experience and instinct help them balance the danger with their love for the sport. Dylan had seen sharks before during his sessions, but had never had a close call. He trusted his judgment and respected the ocean's rules. That morning, the water was clear, the surface glassy. Dylan sat on his board, scanning the horizon for the next swell. A few hundred yards away, another surfer caught a wave, their silhouette briefly visible against the rising sun. Dylan turned his focus back to the water, waiting patiently. The stillness around him was a comfort, but beneath him something stirred. Unbeknownst to Dylan, a tiger shark had entered the area. Measuring nearly 16 feet, it moved silently, its powerful body gliding just below the surface. Tiger sharks are ambush predators, relying on stealth and speed to catch their prey. The shark circled slowly, assessing Dylan. His board and legs dangling in the water likely resembled a turtle, one of the shark's favorite meals. Dylan shifted on his board, unaware of the predator below. He began paddling toward a rising wave, his focus on the swell. The shark moved closer, its shadow now just a few feet from him. Then, in an explosion of movement, it struck. The force of the attack knocked Dylan off his board. The shark's jaws clamped down on his right leg, pulling him underwater. The pain was immediate and blinding. Dylan thrashed, trying to break free, but the shark held tight. Blood clouded the water as the predator shook its massive head, tearing into his flesh. Dylan's instincts kicked in. He punched at the shark's snout, a desperate attempt to make it release him. For a moment, the shark let go and Dylan surfaced, gasping for air. His leg was mangled, the pain radiating through his body. He screamed for help, his voice carrying across the waves. Fellow surfers on the shore and in the water turned toward the sound, their faces pale as they realized what was happening. Before Dylan could swim to safety, the shark struck again. This time it targeted his torso, its powerful jaws tearing into his side. The force of the bite sent Dylan spinning underwater. He struggled, his hands clawing at the water, but his strength was fading. Blood surrounded him, the bright red spreading like ink in the ocean. The surfers nearby paddled frantically toward him, their boards cutting through the water. One of them reached Dylan's board, now floating upside down, but there was no sign of him. They dove into the water, searching desperately. After what felt like an eternity, they found him and pulled his lifeless body to the surface. The group worked together to get Dylan onto a board and paddle him to shore. Their movements were frantic, their faces grim. On the beach, others called for help, but it was too late. Dylan's injuries were catastrophic. The shark's bites had torn through muscle and bone, leaving little chance of survival. The beach, once quiet and serene, became a scene of chaos. Surfers and beachgoers stood in shock, watching as Dylan's body was carried to the sand. The ocean, which had been his second home, had claimed his life in the most brutal way imaginable. In the days that followed, Dylan's death sent ripples through the surfing community. The North Shore, a place that had always been about freedom and adventure, felt heavier. Surfers spoke in hushed tones about the attack, some questioning whether the waters were safe. Others, like Dylan, accepted the risk as part of their love for the ocean. But for those who knew him, the loss was immeasurable. Dylan Reyes, a man who had dedicated his life to mastering the waves, had met his end in the very waters that had given him so much. His final ride was not a victory, but it was a reminder of the ocean's raw power and the thin line between beauty and danger. The waters off Cape Cod, Massachusetts have always been alive with activity. Boats glide across the surface, their crews pulling up lobster traps or casting fishing lines. Beneath the surface, though, the ocean tells a different story. Cape Cod is part of the migratory path of great white sharks, which patrol these waters every summer in search of seals. While shark sightings are common, fatal attacks are rare, making the events of August 14, 2019, even more chilling. That morning, 53-year-old fisherman Tom Barrett set out before dawn. Tom was a lifelong resident of the Cape, known among the locals as dependable and hard-working. He'd spent decades fishing these waters, often alone or with one or two other crew members. Lobstering wasn't just a job for Tom. It was his way of life. He knew every tide, every hidden sandbar, and every season's quirks. The ocean was as familiar to him as his backyard. Tom's boat, the Blue Skipper, was his pride. It was a small but sturdy vessel, painted a faded blue with a deck cluttered with ropes, buoys, and traps. On this particular day, Tom worked with his longtime friend and deckhand, Paul Rivers. The two had set out at sunrise, aiming to check and retrieve lobster traps scattered along the coast. The sun was climbing higher as they approached their third buoy, about half a mile from the shoreline. The traps had been yielding good catches so far, and spirits were high. Tom maneuvered the boat close to the buoy, cutting the engine as Paul prepared to haul up the line. But as Paul tugged, the rope didn't budge. It was snagged, likely caught on the rocky seabed below. Tom, never one to shy away from physical work, decided to handle it himself. He stripped off his boots, rolled up his pants, and climbed down into the waist-deep water to free the line. The sea was calm, the surface reflecting the clear sky above. Tom waded slowly toward the buoy, his hands gripping the line as he tested its tension. He leaned forward, his boots scraping against the sandy bottom, and began working to loosen the snag. Paul watched from the boat, ready to pull the trap up once Tom freed it. Neither man noticed the shadow gliding silently beneath the water. Great white sharks are among the largest and most feared predators in the ocean. They can grow up to 20 feet long and weigh over 4,000 pounds. Off Cape Cod, the sharks follow the seals, their primary food source. They're fast, stealthy, and equipped with rows of serrated teeth, capable of tearing through flesh and bone with ease. While attacks on humans are rare, the presence of a shark this size in shallow waters spells danger. Tom had just begun to loosen the line when the attack came. Without warning, the shark surged from below, its massive jaws clamping around Tom's torso. The force knocked him off his feet and pulled him under the water in an explosion of blood and spray. Paul, frozen in shock, watched as Tom's arms thrashed wildly, his head briefly breaking the surface before being dragged down again. The shark released Tom momentarily, circling back as he flailed, trying desperately to stay afloat. He screamed for help, his voice weak and ragged. Paul grabbed a boat hook and leaned over the side, shouting as he reached toward his friend. Tom managed to grab the hook, his face pale and blood streaming from his side. But the shark returned, lunging at his lower body. Its teeth tore into his legs, shaking him violently before dragging him under once more. Blood stained the water, spreading quickly as the shark thrashed with its prey. Tom's movements grew weaker, his strength fading with each second. Paul, frantic, turned the boat's engine back on and maneuvered closer, shouting for help into the radio. Nearby fishermen heard the call and sped toward the scene, but the moments felt endless. The shark disappeared briefly, leaving Tom floating face up in the water. His body was limp, his injuries severe. Paul leaned over the side, using every ounce of strength to haul him onto the deck. Blood pooled on the wooden boards as Paul ripped off his shirt to try and stop the bleeding, pressing it against Tom's wounds. But the damage was too extensive. Tom's torso bore deep, gaping bites, and his legs were shredded from the shark's second attack. The other boats arrived moments later. Fishermen jumped aboard the Blue Skipper, helping Paul stabilize Tom as best they could. They sped toward the shore, waves slapping against the hull as the men worked in silence, their faces etched with fear and determination. By the time they reached the harbor, paramedics were waiting, but it was too late. Tom had succumbed to his injuries before they could get him to the hospital. The attack sent shockwaves through the tight-knit fishing community. Tom Barrett wasn't just a fisherman. He was a friend, a father, and a husband. His death marked the deadliest shark attack in Cape Cod's recent history, a grim reminder of the ocean's unpredictable nature. Locals, who had always accepted the risks of their livelihood, suddenly found themselves questioning how safe their waters were. In the weeks that followed, scientists and officials studied the incident, noting an increase in shark activity near Cape Cod. The region's booming seal population had drawn more great whites than ever before, and with them came an unavoidable danger. For Tom's family and friends, the tragedy was a stark reminder of the ocean's power, one that would stay with them for years to come. The Maldives, a tropical paradise in the Indian Ocean, is one of the world's most sought-after vacation spots. Its calm, turquoise waters, vibrant coral reefs, and luxury overwater villas make it a dream destination. But beneath the serene surface lies an untamed marine world, home to hundreds of species, including sharks. The Maldives has bull sharks, powerful predators that are unpredictable and dangerous. These sharks are fast and aggressive and can thrive in both saltwater and freshwater, making them a formidable presence in the area. Emily Vaughan, a 29-year-old teacher from Brighton, England, had been looking forward to her trip to the Maldives for months. It was her honeymoon, and she and her husband Daniel had chosen this island paradise to celebrate their new life together. Emily was an adventurous spirit who loved nature and exploring. She had gone snorkeling before, but had never been anywhere as beautiful as the Maldives. She couldn't wait to see its famous coral reefs. The couple arrived at the resort early in April 2021. Their villa stood on stilts over the water, offering a stunning view of the ocean. Every morning they woke to the sound of gentle waves and the warmth of the tropical sun. On the morning of April 18th, Emily was especially excited. The resort had planned a guided snorkeling trip that promised views of the coral gardens teeming with colorful fish. She had been talking about it for days, imagining the underwater sights. Emily and Daniel had breakfast together on the deck of their villa, watching the water shimmer in the sunlight. The boat for the snorkeling trip was scheduled to leave mid-morning, so they packed their gear and walked to the dock where other guests were gathering. The group included about 8 people, all eager to experience the reef's beauty. Sammy, the local snorkeling guide, greeted everyone warmly and handed out masks, fins, and snorkels. He went over safety rules, emphasizing the importance of staying together and avoiding deeper waters. Emily listened intently, her excitement barely contained. The boat ride to the reef took about 20 minutes. The reef they were visiting was known for its shallow waters and vibrant marine life. Sammy anchored the boat and explained the plan. The group would swim along the edge of the reef, staying close to the coral to see the fish and other creatures up close. He reminded them to avoid straying too far into deeper waters, where currents could become unpredictable. With that, everyone slipped into the water. Emily was immediately captivated. The reef was alive with movement. Schools of fish darted in and out of coral formations, their scales flashing in the light. Small reef sharks swam below, their sleek bodies gliding effortlessly. These sharks posed no threat, but their presence added to the thrill of the experience. Emily felt a sense of wonder as she floated, her snorkel allowing her to breathe while taking in the underwater world. Daniel stayed close to Emily at first, but he soon became absorbed in photographing the reef. Emily, meanwhile, spotted a patch of particularly bright coral in the distance. She motioned to Daniel, but he was focused on his camera. She decided to swim toward it alone, thinking it was only a little farther away. The water grew deeper as she moved away from the group, but she was too fascinated to notice. The reef beneath her sloped gently, giving way to open water. What Emily didn't realize was that a bull shark had entered the area. Bull sharks are opportunistic hunters, and their aggressive nature makes them one of the most dangerous shark species to humans. This particular shark, over 10 feet long, was patrolling the deeper waters near the reef. Emily's movements in the water caught its attention and it began to approach, its body moving with silent precision. Emily paused above the coral patch, adjusting her snorkel and looking around for more fish. She noticed the water seemed darker ahead, but she shrugged it off, thinking it was just the shadow of a cloud. Then, without warning, the bull shark attacked. It surged upward from below, its jaws clamping down on Emily's arm. The force of the bite knocked her sideways, and her mask slipped off, leaving her exposed. Pain shot through her arm as the shark's teeth tore into her flesh. She screamed, the sound muffled by the water, and thrashed desperately to break free. The attack sent shockwaves through the water. Daniel and the others turned at the commotion, their hearts sinking as they saw Emily struggling. Sammy grabbed a flotation device and shouted for everyone to return to the boat. Daniel swam toward Emily as fast as he could, his movements frantic. Blood spread in the water, creating a red cloud that blurred their vision. The shark released Emily briefly, circling her as she floated helplessly. Her injured arm hung limp, blood pouring from the wound. She kicked weakly, trying to swim back to the group, but her strength was fading. Before Daniel could reach her, the shark struck again. This time it bit into her torso, its powerful jaws tearing through her side. The force of the attack pulled her underwater, leaving only a swirl of blood behind. Daniel reached the spot where Emily had been moments before. He dove underwater, searching desperately. Sammy arrived seconds later, using the flotation device to keep them steady as they scanned the water. Emily surfaced briefly, her face pale and her movements slow. Sammy and Daniel grabbed her, pulling her onto the flotation device and kicking toward the boat. The rest of the group helped lift Emily onto the boat. Her body was limp, her injuries severe. Blood pooled on the deck as Sammy tried to stop the bleeding, pressing towels against the wounds. Emily's breaths were shallow, her eyes fluttering as she struggled to stay conscious. The boat's captain turned the engine on and sped toward the shore, shouting into the radio for emergency help. The ride back felt like an eternity. Daniel held Emily's hand, his face pale with fear. Sammy continued to apply pressure to her wounds, but the damage was too great. The shark's bite had severed major arteries, and Emily had lost too much blood. By the time they reached the dock, she had stopped breathing. Resort staff and medics were waiting, but their efforts to revive Emily were in vain. The group stood in stunned silence, their faces etched with shock and grief. The beauty of the Maldives, once a source of joy, now felt like a cruel irony. The attack shook the resort and its guests. Bull shark attacks are rare in the Maldives, but their unpredictability makes them especially terrifying. Emily's tragic death served as a stark reminder of the ocean's power and the risks of venturing into its depths. For Daniel and those who witnessed the event, it was a loss that would haunt them forever.